in the presence of a quorum. I'll call the meeting of the Finance Committee of May 26, 2015 to order. This is a point where we do public participation, but I don't really see any members of the public. I will introduce a couple of new members. David Wellinghoff to my extreme right, and Jason Cole sitting in between Bill Mullen and Brian McMullen. Mullen and McMullen. One day I'll get those right.
A rose between two thorns.
You can prepare your introductory speeches. I won't get to that now, but it does include singing your fight song from college.
You never told me that. I don't even know that.
For the benefit of our television audience, we have not gone summer casual on the committee. The Faulkner room has no air conditioning. And I will point out this is the second meeting in the Finance Committee in a row that the Faulkner room had no air conditioning. And I don't believe this is happening to the Board of Selectmen.
I think they're just trying to get us to fund a new HVAC system.
They meet on the cool night. They're the cool crowd, right? So without further ado, I will move to the first item on our agenda, third quarter report from the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District. And I'll recognize anybody who raises their hand in terms of talking. Dr. Brand, you can begin.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Glenn Brand. It's a privilege to be here again this evening as Superintendent of Schools to provide you, along with Claire Janot to my left, who's our Director of Finance, with the fourth quarter update. Third quarter update.
I wish we were done.
Claire's going to run through the slides, and certainly if you have questions, we'd be happy to entertain them as we make our way through or at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Glenn. So I do want to point out that we did send ahead the written information and detailed reports as of mostly the end of April, but on some cases the middle of May, for covering both special revenue funds, grant funds, and the appropriated budget. This is just a brief slide snapshot to give you a sense of where things are that we've been following throughout the year that tend to be a little harder to budget precisely, depending, 6 months before the year even begins. So in regard to revenues, at this point in time, we're anticipating that we're going to be short about $112,000. None of this should be a big surprise to the committee, and it's not to us. As you recall, we took the impact of $280,000 shortfall due to the 9C cuts to transportation, regional transportation, that were announced by the Patrick administration right after the school committee revoted the budget based on the state revenue levels. That's the major reason for a downfall. Normally, we'd be looking for these unbudgeted revenues of $138,000, which represent two major things. Well, 95 of it is, 55,000 is a National Grid rebate towards a energy project that was done at the school and has to show as revenue. And about 40,000, I believe, is the E-rate and then some Medicaid reimbursement. So normally we'd expect that 138,000 to just fall right to E&D, which would be lovely, but that's making up a big piece of the shortfall on the regional transportation. And this projection or outlook continues to keep our E&D at $300,000. You'll remember that our initial budget passed with the expectation of using $500,000 in E&D. And when we saw the additional regional transportation come into the state budget, we said, oh, this is a great opportunity to dip into less E&D and reduced it to 300.
May I interrupt for one
Yes,
second? Claire, we have a couple of new members on the board here.
Yes?
And if you, the acronym patrol
Sorry.
is out, and I just heard a whispering
Acronym
somewhere that said, what's
I
E&D?
apologize to the new members. I was trying to recap where we'd been since the beginning of the year, but
So
I
if you could
forgot
just
about
start
the
with
alphabet soup. So E&D is excess and deficiency, which is a lot like the town using free cash as a funding source towards their budget, but in a regional school district. It's referred to as excess and deficiency, and by statute, we're limited to not having more than 5% of our next year budget, and we are currently at somewhere around 1.4%, I think. We were certified at a little over $1 million for June 30, 14. So the bottom line on this is we think we've got a $112,000 revenue problem that we really need to make up by spending a little less. In regard to this next slide, please note that it says selected projections. This isn't an attempt to give you a bottom line outlook on where June 30th will be. Not to be flip, be earning a lot more money if I knew that on May 26th. So these are the areas we've been watching. And retiree health insurance is projected to come in favorable, workers' comp, Medicare, tax, lower fields debt due to the donation of FALF. The early projection on utilities back in January was that we thought it was safe that we might have $100,000 of savings. Breaking news on this is that we now think this number might be as high as $225,000. I had not changed it for the presentation with the school committee because I was waiting for some additional information before I adjusted it, but that's where we think that might come out. And then there was savings on an item that was budgeted for transportation in the process of pulling together the fiscal 15 budget under a contractual service that isn't necessary, and we've known all along that would be favorable for us. So these items added up to $607,000 of, if you will, favorable mitigation in a sense. Our current projection on our staff budget is a shortfall of $332,000. A small fringe benefit shortfall in one category of $10,000. The legal expense, $134,000. And special ed transportation, this is special contract service transportation above and beyond what's provided by our collaborative for students who have unique and special requirements, and this was not anticipated in the budget. But we obviously need to cover that. So those added up to $662,800. The other thing I'd like to point out that's not in this presentation is part of the reason you don't see special ed tuitions on this page is because they did in fact run over budget this year. However, they were saved, if you will, by a one-time return, almost like a return of equity from the collaborative that they needed to distribute to all of their members, and we received a one-time credit of $459,000 this year that helped us with our sped overrun. So that's why you don't see anything for special ed tuition on this page. So in summary, negative revenues 112, negative certain costs running over to the tune of $663,000, made up with about $607,000 of potential favorability, which now would be $125,000 higher for the adjustment to utilities. And then last but not least, you receive a detailed report in your packet on the special revenues and revolving accounts, and we've been monitoring those throughout the year, at least since probably about December. And there are certain ones that we think the operating budget is going to have to support in order to bring them to zero, namely the athletic fund. We have had conversations about this throughout the last 6 months and have been monitoring and trying to make sure we understand what's going on with that operation. I don't have a bottom line projection on that at this point in time. I hope that this 156 is actually a very conservative number, or conservative at least. Worst case scenario, but until the year really ends and we see what actually happens with cash flow over the next 6 weeks, we can't be sure. So I would say the risk here is that these things, which I probably shouldn't even put a bottom line to, is $323,000. The reason I say I shouldn't put a bottom line to it is because certainly throughout the rest of the budget, there are a number of areas we're favorable in. And that's because as we saw this emerging back in January, Dr. Brand and I agreed that some steps should be taken, and Glenn made decisions on asking people to curtail spending where they could. So we do have some favorability to offset this, and I guess what I would say is, it's my first year closing the books for AB. You never know what you don't know, but I'm optimistic we'll get there. I'm happy to answer any questions. Did you want to add anything?
Just a couple of things, and certainly if you do have questions, I want to thank Claire for her work and diligence. I know that for those members of the committee, as I've come to learn the great work that she does, and I appreciate the feedback that you provided to the committee and to myself as well in terms of this effort. As we continue to move forward this budget, there is an eye towards trying to provide that transparency for members of both communities around our financial picture, and I certainly am very appreciative to Claire for her work to that end. We have, I guess the final point, Claire made mention of this, with the understanding that we were going to be projecting towards a tight end. I want to thank the administrators who have curtailed spending in a number of different areas. It's allowed us to get to this place that we're at now, and we will, as numbers come together, be able to provide you with an end-of-the-year report in the near future. Happy to take questions as you might have.
Well, in recognition of this is his last meeting, I'll start with Bill.
Yes, this is the final show, the reunion tour. So perhaps you said this, but the 332,000 of staff, what's behind that?
As you know, the school district for the last several years has budgeted a, what do we call it? Vacancy factor.
Right.
And that was jumped up a little bit last year to either 450 or 475, I believe. And we've been telling us, the public all along, it looked like it was going to be very difficult to meet that number this year.
So is there any change in FTEs?
In the current year, I'd defer to Marie on that, but
So it's not-
I don't believe it's due to hiring at all. This number's settled in about this level, I would say November or so, and hasn't really moved much.
So no new employees?
No,
Okay.
not that I'm aware of.
Just a couple quick other ones, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay. So just to ask the usual question we ask at this date, there will be no year-end spending, so to speak, because there is going to be a deficit as opposed to a surplus?
There will be no forward spending. There will be a lot of people who are waiting for us to tell them if they can use any of the money that they've held off on spending up to this point.
But no incremental
because
beyond.
there are necessary initiatives, particularly by facilities and technology, that have been held off.
But no spending beyond what was budgeted?
No,
No activities beyond what was budgeted?
none.
Okay, and then the final question, just as a general thing, and I'm sure you've addressed this elsewhere, and I'm sure I just have missed it, but what is your demographic projections for the next year? Any information on the number of students versus the projections, or any changes of
I told
any
you they
radical
always have
nature
a
on that?
question I can't answer.
We're not, if I understand the question, we're not projecting anything different from that which we've gone into the budget building cycle for FY16. The budget plan for FY16 did include a targeted reduction in classroom teachers in some sections. That's been consistent with, as I've come to learn, the district's approach over the last couple of years. Careful eye for the enrollment, and then where we've made adjustments respectively going forward for FY16. That plan does include a reduction of a few classroom teachers.
Occasionally, and I'll be done now, occasionally during the end of the year, you can get a feel that there are more inquiries from people, realtors calling up, or people coming in and talking about the school system, or none of those sort of soft data elements?
No, and it's not, nothing has surfaced that would suggest or warrant that we are changing anything specific to any staffing that we included in the FY16 budget.
Great, I think on my way out, I think this is a great report, Claire. Well done, very clear, concise, informative, and getting to the point, so thank you for that.
Roland?
I just have one question, again, being relatively new to the Finance Committee. What is E-rate?
That's actually a great question because it's changing. So many years ago, they put surtaxes on landline phone bills to collect money to equip public schools with technology. And so the money that came from residential phone bills or business phone bills went into a fund at the federal government and was earned back by school communities to equip their buildings. A lot of it came in the form of a credit on a telephone bill. Sometimes it came as a vendor credit, and sometimes it came as a check that was deposited. Acton Boxborough, like many communities, received a 40% credit a couple of years ago and had for many years. Those numbers are drifting down to zero on the landline and phone bill information. Notably, we didn't get that credit on cell phones, only on landlines. Early on, it was also on certain technology expenditures to help. It was the federal government's way to help schools initially wire for the internet. So it's been around a long time. A big change has come about in this where they're phasing out reimbursement toward those sorts of costs and changing it more towards wireless access and other things. So we'll see that revenue source go down for that, and not quite clear yet on what the numbers will look like under the new program.
Mike?
Yeah, I think that looks like a very good report. Just one question about special ed, especially for the upcoming quarter and next year. Does that transportation issue seem to be sort of under control, or is it still in a state of flux, or a lot of mystery there? Or?
There is still, to me, from the financial side of the house, a little bit of mystery about it. I need to get a little better understanding, frankly, but the understanding I do have is that this isn't something that's optional. It's driven by the needs of a child that might arrive in your district, unknown transportation requirements. Oftentimes, it's not the actual transport, but it's the staff that must ride with the child. So it's an unpredictable item.
To just add to that, some of the circumstances that are included that a district such as ours and others have to contend with, this is not just necessarily the outright transportation. As Claire said, there can be support staff. We do have some circumstances in which, and they may evolve over the course of the year, in which a student might need a nurse, for example, to travel with he or she on the bus. In some circumstances, it's my understanding that we didn't start the year in that particular place, and as things evolved for a particular child over the year, those types of accommodations needed to be put into place. Similarly, some of the students that we have now that are riding individual transportation routes may not have started the year in that respect, and that could be for a myriad of factors as well too. So when we build the special education budget, as we did for FY16, we know the students we have in place. We base the budget building upon what those respective needs are at this point in time. The reality is that just for a few of those students, the circumstances can change, and that can incur some substantial costs when you're talking about, 180 days and the like.
Margaret?
So thank you. Just a couple of questions. One is, you mentioned there's a recommended or required cap on the number or the amount of E&D that you have, 5%. Is there a minimum amount? So there's not a requirement. I'm just curious because
No, there is no
hovering
minimum.
very low, it sounds like.
We are very low. Obviously, by pure math, when the district went from a $40 million budget to a $76 million budget, 5% became a much bigger number. So, maybe the 1.4 would have been 2.5 or something under, but certainly it would be under the smaller size district. Certainly it would be my desire, I can't speak for the entire administration, to see this number grow, which is why we have worked hard to try to live with the $300,000 number, the reduced number, as a support for the 15 budget, despite the revenue going away on the regional transportation.
Thank you. And then just one other question about the SPED spending. I know you just talked about the transportation, but you also were saying how the fact that we had this one-time distribution cost or distribution payout
Yes.
from the collaborative, that wasn't for transportation, right? That's just overall SPED spending that you applied
It's
to?
purely almost like a return of equity on special ed collaborative money. So it is one time, and we were able to use that to reduce the gross amount that they billed us for the current year and pay them $459,000 less than what the current year's cost would have otherwise been.
So would we be down, had we not had that, we would be down another 459,000? So what went wrong with our budgeting there? Is it just another one of these issues with SPED where it's just very hard to predict? What was?
It's hard for me to answer that question. I didn't build this budget. I do know and would emphasize what Glenn said earlier, that in building the 16 budget and in monitoring the 15 budget, it has been done on a per pupil basis. But there's no question that at any point in time, a surprise can arise. Even at this point in time, I have 8 students that I expect to change their placement between now and the end of the year, which could, result in
further.
Additional numbers. Some of them are placed one place and moving, others are new to be placed.
And just a follow-up question on that, has there been any action? I know a while ago, and maybe Christina knows the answer to this too, but, some members of the school committee were trying to work with the state legislature about legislating new budget requirements for the SPED, so that we give us a little bit of relief as a.
So there are a
as
couple things
municipality.
going on. The Foundation Review Commission may get extended, but that was formed at the state level to look at the Chapter 70 formula and what adjustments need to be made and whether any of them should be are affordable to implement. And so we won't know the results of that until next year's budget cycle probably, but we do know that it's, while it's good they're looking at it, and there are a couple of areas, notably health insurance and special ed, that they're trying to tweak. Funding it is going to be a different story. We know that the state budget has got its own issues, so.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Christina?
If I could just add to that, Christina Richlick, I chair the school committee. I just heard back today, actually, from Jen Benson's assistant, whatever the term is. We had Jen Benson come to a meeting in February and talk to us about Chapter 70 funding and about where it might make sense for us to advocate on behalf of our special needs costs. And she made some suggestions of the type of data that would be helpful for them to have. And I followed up with her to ask if it's too late, if they're still interested, and they are. So that's something we'll take on between now and through the summer to compile the data in the way that they need to look at it to work on justifying these tweaks that Claire mentioned. And while I'm up here, I just wanted to share some news, which at least isn't that new, but it's new since the last time we were here in front of you. And that is that I'm very happy to share that Claire is no longer our interim finance director. You may know that. She is now our permanent director of finance, which we're all thrilled about. And I'm sure you're thrilled to have her around for at least another year. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Christina.
Doug?
So Claire, the leader in dubious distinctions, I guess. Congratulations. I want to compliment you both on the summary. I know that with a $70-odd million budget, which represents approaching 80% of our total, or 75% of our total town budget, to really get this across in a way that helps us to understand where the liabilities and opportunities are is difficult. And this is a great format. I like it very much. I would just offer some suggestions. One is that from where we sit, the The major factor is volatility. Since your budget is so big compared to the total, if something gets off the track, then it doesn't have to go off the track very far before it can do a lot of damage. And so the things that I guess we would be most sensitive to would be things that if they were to get out of control through no fault of our own, they could cost us an awful lot of pain and suffering in 90 days, in a quarter, in other words. So I would emphasize the things that I guess I would call sort of a volatility index, and those would be things like, what are the wild cards, the things over which we have no control and that are utterly in the hands of others? And where are they going, and what are we hearing about what's likely to occur? And secondly, what are the principal positive and negative trends overall? What do we know from talking to the legislature or to the governor's representatives, to our legislative delegation, about things that seem to be going on or things that are coming up that would impact us and would accelerate in a positive or negative trend? And then thirdly, the thing about volatility. It's where are we most vulnerable? As we come up on the first year, for example, of a new set of labor contracts, you wouldn't consider labor to be all that volatile. It's a matter of head count and overtime and so on. But coming up on the year where we're about to renegotiate a whole bunch of contracts, that's a volatile element. So in the first case, we're not so concerned. I mean, we are, but we're not as concerned. But in the second case, that can really tip our wagon over. So I think that as you approach this format in the future, if we were to dwell on those three key elements in talking about, okay, here's where we are now, and importantly, over the next 36 months or 24 months, whatever period you choose, looking forward and into the future, these are the things that we're worried about. That would be really helpful.
I appreciate that. I'm trying to get the first year under my belt, and then I should be able to bring more value to the table.
Well, you're doing a great job. That's why I started off with that. Okay,
Bob?
I'm done.
Several years ago, the Finance Committee, one of its goals was to try and have the town and the schools reduce their legal costs, and we dealt with both the town manager and Dr. Branch, your predecessor. And one of the things the school committee did do was to change its legal counsel. You're $134,000 over this year, even with a less expensive legal counsel. Do you have any sense of what that number would have been had you not made that change? No. All right, that's fine. If you did, but I wouldn't necessarily expect that you would. Okay.
Do you want any follow-up on that to provide you information? Okay. I apologize. I don't.
No, and you shouldn't even apologize for not knowing it. But the retiree health does surprise me. I would have thought that when the budget was set, you would have known who was retired. We set the rates in February before the beginning. Where does the 120 come from? Do you know?
That's one I'd rather try to get back to you on and look at specifically, but we've watched this all year long. It was $100,000 right out of the gate. And so, again, I'm not clear on exactly how last year's budget was built, but we've been watching our health insurance in two different ways all year long. One based on, to be colloquial about it, looking at Ruth's census numbers, participation numbers, and saying this is what we expect our expense to be for retirees and for actives. And that's the one I trust the most.
Okay, well, that, you can wait several months, but when you have an answer to that, I would appreciate seeing it. And the last thing is less of a question than a comment. I would hope that when you do your end of the year, that you would reverse this process with special education, show the total cost that you paid for special education, show the offset from the co-op as revenue, and then it will make it abundantly clear exactly what's happening. This way, it basically, you look at your special education costs and you don't know what you're really paying. The other way, where you have both revenue and expense, it doesn't lessen the impact on your budget one way or the other, but it adds a level of clarity. And even going forward into your next year's budget, I would hope that you would consider changing the way in which, I know for years, they have budgeted that.
Your point's very well taken, and I've said from the beginning that I would always continue to bring up this 459 so it didn't get lost in the shuffle this year. Internal documents, I can certainly do that. The way we report that on the end-of-year report is going to be based on guidance I get from DESE. I honestly don't know how they're going to ask us and other school districts to deal with that question.
David, you're allowed to preface any questions with, "I'm new on the committee." But if you have any, go ahead.
Hi, I'm new on the committee. I'm just curious, to add to the legal question, is what are some typical legal expenses?
Legal expenses can range from administrative issues dealing with staff situations to students. And within that bundled within that number are legal services associated with special education hearings, special education situations, or staff administrative situations, and things in between. That is one of those numbers that is sometimes difficult to predict or forecast. That's for sure. Things can come up in which we need to seek out counsel's guidance or advice, and certainly that's happened over the course of the year that's driven that number up.
Thank you.
Jason, you're allowed the same preface.
Oh, good, because otherwise I'd steal my thunder. Definitely, I'm new to the committee, so if these questions are off base, please let me know. What are our plans to take advantage of the E-rate wireless program in the future, and have we thought about it in regards to the park preparation? Because I know that I believe the school is quite concerned about meeting the park requirements with wireless in the classroom.
I can't speak specifically to E-rate. Perhaps Claire can a little bit more specifically in terms of what that framework, what that program looks like going forward. I can't speak to Park. The work that, while we are a district that did not engage in the Park pilot this year, there has been a number of folks who have been involved, including our Director of Technology, Amy Bizowicz, around specifically looking at our classrooms, our infrastructure, and our readiness in terms of everything from bandwidth to the number of units or devices that we have. That was work that started, to be very fair, prior to this year. We, as a district, opted to go with MCAS, or continue, I should say, with MCAS, as you might be aware, this year. But certainly, there has not been any sight lost on what we would need in terms of our readiness to move forward in that direction. As it stands right now, we are, we'll carefully watch the developments with Park. Park is something that is going to be voted on by the Department of Education in the fall, we are understanding, and we'll see where that goes in terms of pursuing our needed readiness for any kind of test administration. But I'm confident with our Director of Technology that we're in a good place that we need to be in terms of that. I don't know if you would want to add anything for E-rate?
No, the E-rate filings are predominantly handled by the technology department, also with some support from finance, so I don't have the details on that. I apologize.
Christina?
If I could just add to the question about Park. I'm not saying we would do this by any means because we have been obviously preparing technology-wise, but Park is also an exam that you can use paper and pencil for. The town of Bedford, for example, did Park on hard copy this year.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Another one.
Go ahead.
You mentioned that people were asking permission to spend money already allocated as the year winds down. She did mention something along those lines, yes? And perhaps this is something that should be taken offline, but what level of autonomy do different members of the schools have to spend their own money, to spend their own budget?
So we have, throughout the district, we have cost center managers or administrators that manage their respective budgets. That includes in the school level, that includes at the central office level. Back in January, February, whenever it was, when I asked folks to hold off on spending, the exceptions were those made around any health or safety issues or urgent needs. We've been in that holding, quite frankly, we've been in that hold pattern since then, and anything that has gone through as a purchase order or things necessary to operate a classroom, pay a utility bill, and the like. There are a number of things that are on a list that folks were intending to spend money for, but we've not freed up those accounts yet, except things that rise to sort of that level of necessity. And we'll continue working with Claire to take a look at what might remain. There could well be some items out there that have emerged over the last couple of months that have, bumped up on a list of things that we should attend to, and sooner. We'll make decisions on those on an individual case-by-case basis.
Thank you. And then just one last quick question. On the last slide, you said that the sped circuit breaker raised the full funding of $9.9 million. The impact is TBD. Is the impact guaranteedly good or guaranteedly bad? Can you give us any direction on that potential impact?
I haven't had a chance to calculate what 9.9 million statewide means to the percentage. And it would be good news. Politicians label this as a big increase, but it's all in where you sit when you choose your adjectives.
But tending higher, tending positive.
Oh, definitely positive. So this brings me back actually to the comment made by Doug about vulnerabilities. One of the things that I'm hoping we can do, this year we have favorable circuit breaker revenue, and you're allowed to carry some of that forward. You have to use it by the end of the second year. And our district has always spent all of it pretty much in the year they receive it. I'm hoping to carry forward some of that favorability to mitigate problems that crop up next year, because I don't have this $400,000 benefit.
I just might add that you might recall when we built the FY16 budget, we built it around a circuit breaker reimbursement of 68%. As luck would have it, this is favorable, and it's trending in the right way for us. But with that being said, and to Claire's point, to the degree that we will realize greater reimbursements within the specific realm of circuit breaker to offset special education tuition costs, we'll be careful to monitor that and look to see where it is that we're able to roll those funds forward. The benefit, of course, of doing that is that it can provide an additional layer of protection, so that when our district might receive 3 more students this month or next month that we now have responsibility for fiscally, and it's not planned for in that sense, it provides us with a cushion, and we're going to look to try and do that. So it's definitely, whatever that will translate to, we'll certainly get that number. But I'm thankful that we went the conservative route to build the budget around the 68% reimbursement for next year.
Thank you.
Roland, you got one more?
One more question. In dealing with utilities, where you said you have a $100,000 favorable this year, and we seem to have a winter that never ended, especially when it came to temperature in April and the beginning of this month. So I would imagine the heating cost a lot more for the buildings versus the prior year or prior. Is that taken into account within the $100,000 difference or favorable?
So I believe what I said was that at January, we saw that we might be favorable as much as $100,000. I work on the projections on this closely with the facilities director. And at that point, we still had many months of winter ahead of us, and that was the most we were willing to say we saw. That correlates exactly with how much he cut his utility budget for the 16 budget cycle. He actually reduced the budget for utilities because he feels that's permanent. We did have a tough winter. I haven't looked at therm data or kilowatt data at this point, but he does expect that it's actually going to be as much as maybe 200,000. So it's a deeper discussion to understand, gee, how do you pull that off in this kind of winter? And I'm not the right person to ask.
That's basically my question. Thank you.
So as we sit here now, you've got a deficit that you have to try and close by June 30th. Since both towns have voted their assessments, if you don't close the deficit by June 30th, I take it we hit our already meager E&D to cover it? Is that the plan?
So The current plan is to not hit our E&D and to solve this problem. And we think that we've been trying to take all the steps necessary from midwinter so that all of my colleagues at the director level are doing what they need to do to work together as a team. And unless there's something starkly surprising, I don't expect to be surprised.
It's 30 days to go, Claire.
I know, anything could happen, I understand, Steve.
Doug?
I'll say something that's really apostasy as far as this committee is concerned, which relates to puddles of money around the landscape, which we find on the town side. There are pools of money that are around doing things and enterprise funds and so on. And we're generally hostile to the notion that those should be in the dark and added to without a lot of supervision. That said, I think that your budget, given the size that it is and given how vulnerable it is, you don't have an awful lot of variables. 71, 72% is labor costs. Your ability to step in and put your thumb on the scale when labor costs are so much of what you have to work with, I think is very limited. It's less programmatic and more about the people that are there carrying on every day. So I think that means that the ability to apply the brakes when you need to is more limited in the school side late in the year than it is in the town side. So what I would advocate in your thinking is that, and we've talked about wild cards and negative and positive trends, volatility, one-time events, and their impact on the system. I would add something else that I think you may have used the phrase, shock absorbers. If there are things that you have a degree of uncertainty about and you're anticipating that there may be some positive revenues, I'd encourage you to be very candid about the fact that, look, we don't know what's going to happen over here. And so we're not releasing our department heads to spend money that's in the budget because we have X, Y, and Z that are staring us in the face, and so we're holding back. And that's your ability to apply the brakes. And so being candid about that, I think, is very useful. It helps the public to understand that you're actually managing flying the airplane as you go into the last 30 days of the year. So I think that talking about shock absorbers and what they are and how you plan to address them as you go along in these quarterly reports is a very useful thing to do.
I might also add that the understanding of, or the analogy of the flying the plane, Claire, I know you recognize Claire and I both walking into the cockpit as the plane was taking off, but this year has been informative and helpful in terms of providing us, and through Claire's diligence and good work in terms of helping me understand our budget. And yes, it might be a big budget, but at the same time, I firmly do believe that with the right approach taken and the right tools applied, we can unpack that budget in a way that is clear and understandable for not just this committee, but for our community as a whole. And that transparency will just lead to a lot more clarity and hopeful support in terms of specific areas where we need to focus our attention on going forward. So it's suffice to say that the learning's still occurring and taking place as we dig into other parts of our operation, as big as it might be, and there's still some learning that can be had for sure as we identify our expenses across the board, and be able to be back here in the fall with even that much more of a deeper sense of understanding around what our fiscal responsibilities are.
If I may follow up, please.
Sure.
Just to take the corollary to what Doug just said, it's my understanding that the spending freeze went in place in January, and now you're trying to make to the end of the year, and you definitely are trying to meet the budget, which is absolutely fantastic and to be lauded. But would it be possible to get a list of the things that didn't quite make it, the things that end up on the editing room floor? What is the opportunity cost of what we didn't do this year by not having the originally planned for budgetary numbers?
So if I was to rephrase that, and correct me if I misunderstand you, you're wondering who didn't spend their money in order to cover these overages, these shortfalls?
Were there projects that were identified that would have been funded were it not for the $323,000 shortfall?
So there is Most certainly that, but once we get, I don't know that I'm thinking of anything specific and large that stands out in my mind at this point in time. It would be my expectation that when the year is actually closed, we'll give a clear and transparent report to the school committee of what didn't happen, at least in terms of dollars and cents, to cover the things that went over. I hope that will be helpful to this committee.
I'm sorry. And, yeah, the question is understood and reasonable, and it would be, to echo what Claire said, my expectation to be able to report back to the school committee around what things might have got caught in that hold, and what larger projects or larger commitments that we're committed to as part of building this FY15 budget. A year ago, before we got here, but an understanding around those specific projects that may have not been able to move forward, and what that impact is. That's a fair point, and certainly as we hit the end of the year, we'll be able to do that to some degree.
That'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
All right, then. I will echo some of the comments. I thought this was a good report, and a good format to follow in the future. Beyond that, thank you for coming out on this warm night and in this warm room. I will now go a little bit off of agenda and ask Jason first to just give us about 2 minutes on who you are, how long you lived in Acton, what you do, things like that.
My name is Jason Cole. I've been in Acton now for almost 8 years. I have 2 children in McCarthy Town. I am not an accountant. I'm a data center engineer, both on the identification and implementation side of life, and happy to be in Acton still.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Dave Willinghoff. I've lived in Acton for about 6 years. My wife and I have 2 children. My wife Sandy and I have 2 children. Greta is 4 and Gus is 1. They are both in daycare. My wife works full-time, and I actually work in the city full-time as an analyst for an insurance company doing bond analysis. So my evenings are great to meet with everyone and talk about town business. Looking forward to working with everyone.
Okay, thank you. While I've got you here, Christina, could you just give the committee an update on the election of your new and not new officers?
Certainly, Steve. Last Thursday night, we elected new school committee officers. I will continue as chair for this coming year, and our Acton vice chair will be Paul Murphy, and our Boxborough vice chair will be Mary Brolin.
Thank you. And thank you for serving again. All right, now we'll move on to election of our officers. These will take effect at our next meeting. I am not standing for re-election. No, yeah, right. So at this point, I'll ask for nominations. Bob?
Mr. Chairman, I nominate Mike Majors to be the chair for next year.
Any other nominations? Yeah. All in favor of Mike Majors as chair, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right. Would you care to continue, Bob?
Yes, for vice chair, I nominate Margaret so that she and Mike can have a great time at the ALG next year.
Thank you.
Any other nominations? All right. All in favor of Margaret as vice chair, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? You're on a roll, Bob. Go ahead.
I nominate Roland to be secretary, and he can follow Margaret's great example of very complete minutes, perhaps distributed electronically a bit earlier than a few hours before the meeting. And in addition to my nomination, I offer the observation that I believe in very short minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I second it to the extent that Roland more
Borden.
I did catch that before I printed it out. familiar in a different way.
All in favor of, oh, okay. Any other nominations? All in favor?
Wait, sorry. Sorry, late breaking news. I nominate Doug Tyndall for the office of clerk.
Ooh,
Right?
you want to be clerk? No, Alan and Mitchell ran against me for clerk once. You'll see. Do I take that to be a withdrawal, Mr. Borden? Sure. All right, then. Any other nominations? All in favor of Doug Tyndall as clerk, say aye. Aye. Opposed? There's your chance, Ron. All right. Abstentions? Congratulations to our new officers. Okay, Mike, I think people got back to you on summer schedule. I know I did, I know Bob did.
I think the only issue was it for June. Next month?
So June, we're scheduled to meet the 12th and the 26th?
Yes, but we won't do it, I guess the question is, do we need to meet twice?
No, but those are different, those are wrong dates.
Okay.
So.
What are the right dates?
The right dates are the 9th and the 23rd. And I will just say that 6th grade graduation is on the 23rd, which involves me.
23rd will not work.
All right. So then our next meeting will be on the 9th. And do we have a July and August preference?
Good question.
So those meetings would be the 14th and the 28th. Were you hearing back from people on dates?
Actually, I haven't.
Okay,
Do we want to?
so maybe we have.
We want to say that one more time? If you have a preference on meeting for the new members, we typically only meet once during the month of July and August. So if you have preference on what date you want to meet or don't want to meet, get your preference to Mike as soon as possible.
Can I throw out an idea?
Of course.
So since we have 2 new members, and what's the story with the person that's replacing Herman? Is he coming on later?
August 1st.
August 1st?
Herman's term is not up yet.
Okay.
He has to.
So he's
He has
still-
to formally step down before anyone can step in.
Okay, so.
But the person has been
Identified,
identified.
but not necessarily appointed, because he couldn't be
He's
appointed.
been appointed, but not sworn in.
He can't be sworn in until Herman's
He was appointed.
unsworn.
That's weird that he could be appointed.
He could be appointed as an associate, I guess.
Okay, well, whatever. But anyway, the point I wanted to make is with David and Jason being new and Roland being relatively new, and then, how do you pronounce his name? Shu
Shu Yi Lee.
Shu Yi coming on board. I wonder if the summer would be a good time to actually do some informal kind of training sessions for the new members, with our super seasoned members here.
We prefer to be known as chronologically gifted.
No, seasoned has nothing to do with age in this case. We don't have to necessarily do them on those days. We can come up with different days and, anyway. So I think that's something that we should consider. So I don't know, Mike and I can maybe talk about that a little bit more and send out some dates for that. Would you guys
Doug and
want
I
that?
have-
I mean, I
Doug
certainly
and I
wish
have
had
chatted
that.
about the fact that some sort of training session, boot camp,
Yeah,
would be
good.
appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many acronyms that get thrown around and different concepts. There are some training sessions that I think always happen in October. That's when I
Yeah.
went, and not this past year, but I think the year before, yeah. That the sort of statewide association of finance committee and municipal committees meets, and that's actually really helpful. So I'm sure we'll get those dates at some point, but those won't be till October. But I think just having some knowledge about, you know, what's happening in our town, what's just a little bit of historical information as well, I think would be really helpful. And maybe Bill will even be willing to come back and help out with that.
A guest speaker?
We're just losing a lot of institutional knowledge for sure. So, so anyway.
No, it's certainly an appropriate suggestion. Yes, Doug?
We had an email, and I'm trying to retrieve it, I can't get on the town's connection at this point, but there was an email within the last 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, from the town manager relating to the ATFC spring training sessions and so on. And it got lost in my shuffle, and I found it, and it had meetings for May the 14th.
Yeah.
Useless, but I am in the dark about when I actually received it. I think, however, there was one date that was left open, and I think it might have been the 23rd, if I'm not mistaken, of June. And unfortunately, it's in Amherst.
Who sent that email out?
Steve Ledoux forwarded it. I thought it was, I may be wrong. I'm not going to say. I thought it was a specific topic as opposed to a general training. It was.
What they're trying to do, as I understand it, is to broaden their offering.
Yeah.
So that they're doing things that are more issue-oriented and subject matter focused. And this one's in Amherst, and I think it has to do with the management of capital, the budgeting for capital expenses, which would be good for our new members and for any of the rest of us to attend, because I think that one of our concerns has been that the long-term capital forecast in terms of replacements and useful lifetimes and so on has been an issue. And it's only been within this current year budget cycle that we actually have a consultancy built into the expenses to have someone go over all of the town's facilities and similarly break them down by useful lifetimes and so on. So it seems to me that it's congruent, that the town manager is moving in that direction, and the finance committee should be on board and up to date on that. And this is an opportunity for our newest members to catch the cutting edge of what's happening as far as budgeting is concerned from the perspective of ATFC. Now, I think you're right. I think ATFC kind of goes to sleep in the summertime and then picks up in the fall. But any opportunity that we've got to knock one of these sessions out, approx a month from now, would be something that we ought to look at.
Yes, Margaret?
I just found the email. It's actually this Thursday, May 28th.
Oh, is it really that
Yeah.
early? Okay.
Yeah, but it is in Amherst. And it says it's from 5:30 to 7.
Yeah, that's too soon. I wouldn't have mentioned it.
So, well, you know, if people still want to go, but I can't go, but, anyway, that's what it is.
Okay, we have minutes from our last meeting.
We do. We do.
If you get them approved, this will be
So
it.
there we go. Bob, I never knew that you like to get them early. I would have known that. I would have sent them out. I always have them ready. I just figure people don't look at them till the day of. Okay.
Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of May 12th?
So made.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Come on, guys, somebody
Aye.
say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And for the record, Jason and David abstained.
Yeah.
Committee reports. Anybody care to share a committee report? Yes, Mike.
Yeah, at the Minuteman Regional School Committee meeting last week, the Minuteman School Committee approved the option to build a new school by new construction versus the renovation or the repair options. The vote was 11 in favor, 3 opposed, with Arlington, Belmont, Wayland, and 1 absent, and then 1 that did not vote, which was Acton, because our representative was not there yet. Pam Norris has agreed to replace Nancy Banks as the school committee liaison, school committee member, I guess so, to represent Acton for the Minuteman Regional School Committee.
Okay, thank you. Doug?
Mike, did Sudbury vote for it or against it? Do you remember?
Sudbury voted, I could tell you, do I have my list there?
After the long history of,
I think it was I think they voted, oh, that's the,
Wayland voted against.
Wayland.
No, actually, Wayland voted to withdraw
I think it was Sudbury.
from the
it was,
district.
okay,
Because that was
the individual who represents them, yeah, okay.
back in here.
So essentially, the new regional agreement has not been ratified unanimously, so there is no new regional agreement. As best I can recollect, there is no way out of the old regional agreement. There's no provision for withdrawal unless you get unanimous support. Arlington's already indicated they will not allow anybody to withdraw. And frankly, I don't know why we would want anybody to withdraw either. But yeah, I guess in less than proper political term, it's just a mess. You can put that in the minutes if you want.
But it was a major milestone for
Yes.
the school committee to approve.
Yes, Roland.
CPC sent out their award letters at their last meeting, and they're going to be meeting next month to, I guess, strategize or discuss about bringing a town meeting next year about raising the surcharge, CPA surcharge from 1.5% to 3%.
Okay.
So I did say that would be.
Say that again, sorry.
They're looking to raise the CPA surcharge. That's
Who is
currently
they, the CPC?
CPC, to bring to town meeting from 1.5% to 3%.
Wow.
I said, they're going to have opposition to it. I mean, I just said,
What do you have to, 2/3 vote, or what is it?
I believe that's a 2/3 on that one. It might just be a majority.
Might just be a majority,
I'm
I'm
not
not
100% sure on that. But, I mean, as we've discussed here, your taxes keep going up and up and up and up, and that's just, people are looking and saying, that's another tax.
It isn't tax.
Yeah, it is.
It's right on your tax bill.
For this party tax bill.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
I have a question about that, Roland. So, one thing that surprised me when Peter Ashton came in to present about the projects, the CPC projects, is that, he sort of said, yeah, we actually had, more projects than we could actually fund, which he seemed surprised about, and I was surprised that he was surprised, because to me, it seems like it should be an award that you're selecting from a big bucket of different things, and you're trying to select the best things in town.
Right.
So, to me, the fact that we're not even, so I was suggesting, look, maybe you guys need to do some more advertising, that there is this program, so you have a bigger pool to choose from. So I'm very surprised to hear that somehow we think we need to add more money to the fund if we've rarely even been oversubscribed in what we give out. But maybe I'm missing something.
Well, they've been oversubscribed, they've had more requests than they've been able to fund for the last 3 or 4 years.
Right, but to me, you should always have more requests.
In my opinion, that'd be correct.
So,
I mean, I think what they're looking at, and the way Peter's probably looking at it, his lens, is that you want to have a big stockpile of cash, so when you have an open space purchase, that you have, we know eventually Stonefield Farms will be coming up for sale, will be coming up in the town's first right of refusal on that, and that's 40-something odd acres, 48 or 52, something like that. And that's going to be a lot of money, so we'd have a lot of money in reserves to pay for that, or to fund a good portion of that.
but you already put stuff in the reserves, don't you?
Yeah, it's
you
about
already are
it's
saving
about
stuff.
2.4 million,
Yeah.
somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we can have a discussion later, but that's interesting to me.
We also bonded one too. I mean, yeah, we bonded the Right Hill Terrace, Right Hill, and that comes out every year, and that's going to be coming out of the CPC set-up side, or they can elect if they want to have it come out of
The actual
I'll call it
funds.
free cash, yeah, with the fund balance. One of them that didn't get funded this year was a well for Morrison Farm. They did fund the one for the Arboretum, but the proponents came to us and said they wanted to fund both of them this year. And they said, well, we're going to fund one. And, you come back next year with the other one if you really want to have that, or what have you. The water company wants them to have their own well, so they're not using the water company water, and it's not coming off. It's basically coming out of the house that's still there, that, in my opinion, should be torn down, but that's another subject. But that's what's kind of driving up some of these things.
Mike, I don't know if you're going to get into committee assignments at the next meeting. At the moment, we've got nobody covering school committee since Mary Ann resigned. If you want me to cover school committee on an interim basis, I'd be happy to do so.
Yes, if you would like to do that,
Okay.
you're more than welcome.
All right. I don't know what, oh, Bill.
Just on committee reports, the Morrison Farm Committee has been meeting, and we're making some progress, very methodical progress to implementing the plan that was approved about a year or so ago. So the progress you're probably going to be able to see is at the Ice House Foundation. That plan has basically been put in place. They're going for permits. And Doug, you were there probably around September or something. We should start to see some action down there. And then there's the other work it's just going to be very methodical. There's all kinds of conservation issues, and so we're dealing with those as we go along. But the committee is active and engaged and coming up with solutions.
Yes, Margaret.
So just on Acton 2020, we met the day after our last FinCom meeting, and we actually, so we had gathered a whole bunch of representatives from a lot of different committees to address specifically the issue of the position for the land use director / economic development director. And we then submitted a letter on behalf of Acton 2020 that reflected some of the comments of the other committees, and I think the other committees were submitting letters as well. And the gist of it was not dissimilar than, from the gist of what we all had discussed. So I won't go into that. But the latest I had heard from the selectmen meeting that is sort of all that feedback kind of fell on deaf ears, but I don't know if there's more. I'd be kind of curious where that is.
I'll recognize Janet Adachi, the sole member of our audience.
Yes, I'm devoted, but no, I'm also the liaison, so I have to come here. I actually like coming here, but yeah, the selectmen at their last meeting, which actually ended at 8:10, notwithstanding that the agenda included the discussion of the economic development and land use director job description, about which we had a ton of input and feedback. We discussed it and we agreed, just turn it all over to the town manager and let him deal with it. There were people who wanted to have another opportunity, another crack at the description, but honestly, the job description is really the town manager's to craft, and I think that opening up the content of the job description to general comment from the public was kind of unusual, and it kind of got out of hand at times. And one thing I said behind the scenes is I do not want this to go beyond our last meeting because we have other things to do. So the town manager has already, he found a lot of the feedback to be very helpful, and he was probably more diplomatic about it than I was talking behind the scenes, but he has actually refined the description, and he's going to work with what he has, but he did take the comments and input seriously. There were some comments that have come in very late, and rather insistently from one committee. I don't think that the comments from that committee are not reflected by prior comments that the town manager has accounted for. So we'll see what happens. I don't know what the revised and new and improved description looks like myself, so.
All right. There's no other business to come before the committee. I'll recognize Bill Mullen for a...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is my last meeting of the Finance Committee, for now. Who knows? Thank you, just for a moment of personal privilege, if you don't mind. So you always want to pretend you're going to be coming back, otherwise people might not listen to what you have to say. So, and it's funny, is I first was elected to the office in the town of Acton in 1974, and which is quite a long, that was 41 years ago. And this town came in downstairs and got my papers and all that sort of stuff when I was 20, so it's a long time. First on Finance Committee in 1989, 90, 91, then went on to be selectman for 6 years, and then I came back about 9 years ago and was on Finance Committee and did a bunch of other stuff in between. But I thought it'd be just helpful, perhaps, to just tell you a little bit about what my philosophy has been in all of that time, and it's not going to be long, but I'd like to emphasize 7 points. And I think that this is what I've tried to do, and I think it's been successful in some degrees. And the first thing is, I've always said that you should spend money as if it's your own money. If you had the amount of money that is necessary to do so, would you spend that yourself or not? And if the answer is no, you shouldn't spend it. So I've tried to, every time I hear something, I think about that. The second basic thing, and we heard this tonight, is go visit the physical locations. So when we're talking about Minuteman Tech, you should go visit the school. Doug has spent a lot of time. If we talk about Morrison Farm, you should know what that is. If you talk about the Cowett land, if you're talking about the difference between the Parker Damon School and McCarthy Town, what does that mean? Some people know it, but visit the physical locations, the new facility which we just purchased on Harris Road. The third is to focus on recommendations and not just criticism. I mean, I've sat on this board, and we've had the best critics in the world who just don't do anything. And to me, you think about things, you criticize them, you analyze them, and then the next thing is to come up with a recommendation. The gentleman down the far end is the king of recommendations about the health insurance trust. It never comes without a number attached to it at the end game. And when you have a recommendation, then it's something that we can respond to. So I've always tried to come with not just a criticism, but a recommendation. The fourth thing is to focus on land use from a perspective of 25 years in the future. If it's 25 years from now, what would we want to have happened in our town? So we'll try to take a look back, because the land in Acton is so precious. We're so different from 1950 that we should try to save it. A new one that I've been trying to focus on is treat our businesses like customers. And for so long, we've seen that the classification change and the shift go from when I started, it was about 80-20 residential to 20% commercial, and now it's 87 residential and 13 business, and that has an impact on all of us. If we treat our businesses like customers, I think we'll improve that. The sixth thing is go deep on an issue. When you don't be scattered, but pick one thing and become an expert. And I've tried to do that on many things. A lot of it's focused on land use and taking assets that we've had and converting them to productive uses. NARA, Morrison Farm, Camp Acton, Leary Field, Lower Fields are all things that we put into play. And the final thing, I don't know if I've ever said this before, but every year is a snowflake. And that's an inside joke because I say that every year. And there is, as much as, we've done a great job of preparing, looking to the future, and I think we've gotten to the point now where we've gotten to a good spot, and I've called it Noonian logic, which is to say, if we do certain things, what does 1% change in the budget mean to us? Rather than say the sky is falling in 3 years or 5 years, but if you don't do things, that's going to be the result. But every year is different. I've been through recessions and I've been through boom times, and as I've oftentimes said, the good times are oftentimes more vexing than the dear times, because you have more options. So those sort of 7 things, I just wanted to share them for anybody who might listen. That's kind of how I've tried to carry myself in this committee and all the other things I've done. And with that, I thank you all for the service that I've been able to offer, and appreciate the time, and wish you the best of luck. I'm going to pretend this is like the Politburo, and I'll clap too. So.
I don't think I've ever seen this group give a standing ovation before, Bill. Thank you for your comments. It's good advice. I hope you're taking notes, Jason. If not, they'll be in the minutes. You can't get a better piece of advice than Bill just gave you, how to be on this committee. You'll be missed, but I hope you won't be a stranger. And
It's FYI, I'm going to be accepting a position on the Acton Water District Finance Committee in the next month, so I will move to a less rigorous, since this was so intense.
our loss, their gain.
You're on the right side of that equation.
All right, I'll entertain, I don't know which of the new guys came last, so for the moment, Roland, you're up. All right, Jason, you're up.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.